Did I betray my family by choosing my own future? I am a 19-year-old woman who grew up being treated as half of a match set with my twin sister Lena, when nearly every choice in my life revolved around what she wanted and what kept her comfortable. From childhood we shared a loud bust-out bedroom because she liked bright colours, and I once got punished in primary school for hanging a sketch of a dragon because it was considered too gloomy for her taste. Our mother dressed us alike for years because she thought it was charming, and when Lena wanted to take dance classes in grade school, I was enrolled too, even though I begged to try kickboxing, which my father shut down by saying I was selfish, and my mother argued it was too aggressive for my sister. As we got older, it only intensified, with me being forced to include her in every social plan, being accused of exclusion if I wanted time alone, and even watching her pursue boys I admitted like almost immediately after I shared my feelings. By our final year of secondary school, she had already decided that we would both attend a beauty academy together, and our parents fully supported that plan without ever asking what I wanted. Feeling like my life was already written for me, I quietly applied to join the Coast Guard in another country shortly after my birthday and was accepted. When I finally sat my parents and Lena down to tell them I would not be attending the academy and would be leaving for training instead, they reacted with shock and anger, accusing me of being disloyal, cruel, and willing to abandon my family simply to do something on my own for once, leaving me questioning whether choosing independence really made me the villain they claim I am. Did I cross a line by turning away family at my daycare? I run a small in-home childcare program and take care of several young children during the week, including a baby related to me through my partner's side of the family. Having her in my care has been genuinely meaningful, and I love being involved in her milestones, but I also run my daycare with clear written policies that apply to every parent equally. One of those rules is about supplies, especially diapers. I always let parents know well in advance when their child's stash is running low, first in person at pickup and then with reminders by message. If a child arrives with only a few diapers left and no replacements brought in despite multiple warnings, I cannot take them for the day because I am not allowed to use other children's supplies or provide my own. Over the past few weeks, the baby's parent repeatedly promised to bring more diapers and repeatedly forgot, brushing it off each time as a simple mistake. The night before the issue finally came to a head, I sent a very clear message explaining that diapers needed to be brought the next morning or I would have to refuse care for the day. When she arrived the next morning with nothing, she was furious that I followed through, insisting that family should be an exception, that I should bend the rules out of love, and that I clearly did not understand how hectic life is for parents. I stayed calm and explained that making exceptions for relatives would be unfair to everyone else and would undermine my professionalism, but she accused me of being cold and heartless for prioritizing rules over family. Now there is tension at family gatherings and whispers that I chose policy over compassion, even though I feel like I simply did my job the way I do for everyone. Did I go too far by cutting off my parents' control? I am a 19-year-old university student in my second year, and until recently my parents were covering most of my tuition and rent while I handled smaller expenses. In exchange, they required that I keep her location tracking app active on my phone at all times so they could see where I was, which made me uncomfortable, but I accepted because they were financially supporting me. Over winter break, everything changed after a massive argument with my father when I switched my program from chemistry to practical healthcare, a decision he said was reckless and a waste of my potential even though it felt deeply right to me. After the fight, my parents cut off all financial help completely, forcing me to take on 2 part-time jobs and significant student loans to stay enrolled, and since then I have paid for everything on my own. A few weeks ago I went on a short road trip out of province with friends, and my mother began sending frantic messages demanding to know why I was so far from campus, which is when I realized they were still tracking me. Feeling shocked and violated, I deleted the app immediately, only to be flooded with angry calls from both parents accusing me of being irresponsible and unsafe without constant monitoring. I calmly told them that since I am now financially independent, I need privacy and autonomy, and that being tracked no longer feels appropriate. My father exploded in anger and my mother broke down, insisting I was trying to abandon them entirely, and they have now threatened to exclude me from future family holidays unless I reinstall the app. I feel torn between guilt and relief because while I love my parents, I also feel like I am finally breathing for the first time and choosing my own life. Did I cross a line by setting boundaries in my own house? I am a 48-year-old parent, and I own a small house where my 2 sons, aged 22 and 20, currently live. I moved out last year but kept the house in their names to give them stability while they get on their feet. I only ask that they split the utility bills evenly, keep one room available for me when I visit, and most importantly respect each other and the shared spaces. Money is tight for everyone, so I have tried to be generous and flexible. Growing up, the spare bedroom that is technically mine was always the main hangout space. It had the best television, the most seating, and became the default common area for years. When I moved out, my younger son asked if he could move his bed into that room, and I agreed on the clear condition that it would remain a shared space because his older brother still uses it regularly to relax and unwind. The issue began with my younger son's girlfriend, who I will call Mia. Over time, she started letting herself into the house whenever she wanted, even on days when my younger son was not home. At first, I did not see a problem, especially since my older son had no personal issues with her and tried to be polite. A few days ago, however, my older son told me something that made my stomach drop. Mia had come over while my younger son was out. My older son let her in, assuming it was fine. He went into the shared room to watch a movie on the futon, which is something he has always done. May followed him into the room, lay down on the bed that my younger son had moved in, and partway through the movie she told my older son she was uncomfortable with him being there and asked him to leave because she wanted to nap. Feeling awkward and unsure of his place, he left the room in silence, even though it was a common space in a house he lives in. The next day, emotions boiled over. My older son confronted his brother and explained what had happened and how humiliated he felt being pushed out of a shared room in his own home by someone who does not live there. That was when I was finally told about the situation. I was upset not just on his behalf, but because it violated the clear understanding we had when I moved out. That room was never meant to become private territory, especially not for a guest. I stepped in and set a firm boundary. I told my younger son that his girlfriend is welcome only when he is physically home and that she is not to be at the house alone anymore. I explained that if she feels uncomfortable being around his brother in a shared home when he is not present, then she should not be there at all. My younger son thinks this rule is unfair and controlling. From my perspective, I am protecting my older son's right to feel comfortable in the home he lives in and enforcing the agreement we already had about shared spaces. I am now questioning whether I handled this the right way or if setting this boundary makes me the unreasonable one. Did I go too far by holding my wife to the same chore rules? I met my partner, whom I will call Laura, during our final year at university. Shortly after graduation, she became pregnant and we decided together that she would not look for work until after our child was born. When our daughter arrived, Laura stayed home full-time for the first 2 years. During that period, money was tight but manageable, and I worked full-time to support us. What was not manageable was the constant tension over housework. I would come home exhausted and still be faced with a kitchen full of dishes, toys scattered everywhere, and the expectation that I would clean, cook dinner, clean again, and then help with bedtime. As our daughter grew older and more energetic, the mess only multiplied, and I felt like I was drowning. The biggest point of conflict was the kitchen. I would walk in after a long day to find counters covered, dishes piled up, and food left out. I would clean it, make dinner, then clean the same space all over again. After that, I would go through the house picking up the debris of the day. Whenever I brought this up, Laura's response was always the same. She watched our child all day, so it was only fair that I did more once I got home. After countless arguments and feeling completely worn down, I finally gave in. We created a strict chore chart to stop the fighting. Her responsibilities were childcare during the day, laundry, grocery shopping, and handling appointments. Mine were cooking dinner, daily cleaning like wiping counters and picking up toys, taking out the trash, meal preparation, and the full nighttime routine including baths. This summer, everything changed. My company told me I would be laid off around late autumn. After many conversations, Laura found a job and became the primary income source for our family. I stayed home with our daughter and enrolled in an online graduate program so I could improve my prospects. From my perspective, things have been fine. I manage our child, keep up with my studies, and make sure the house is reasonably clean. I even load the dishwasher throughout the day so mess does not pile up. Laura, however, is miserable. She says she hates coming home from work and still having to do chores. She feels it is unfair and exhausting. This has turned into constant arguments. She insists that since she is now the one bringing in most of the money, she should not have to deal with housework when she gets home. Every time she says this, I point back to the chore chart and remind her that this is exactly what I did for 2 full years while working full-time. I was the sole provider then, and I still cooked, cleaned, and handled bedtime. I also remind her that I am not lounging around now. I am caring for our child all day while also keeping up with a demanding academic program. Law says I am being rigid and unfair for refusing to change the system. I feel like I am simply asking for consistency and respect. Friends we have spoken to are divided, which has left me second-guessing myself. I genuinely want to know if holding her to the same expectations I lived under for years makes me unreasonable, or if I am justified in standing my ground. Was I wrong to stop covering this weekly favour? Last autumn, my partner Alex and I fell into a routine around their Sunday evening shifts. Alex works those nights and I usually have Sundays off. The problem is that Alex tends to sleep until about 20 minutes before they need to leave. Lately, that has meant panicked mornings and last-minute requests. More than once, Alex asked if I could take their car and fill it with gas before they left for work, since there was not enough time to get dressed, fuel up, and still arrive on time. At first I did not mind. I would take the car, stop for fuel, sometimes grab a coffee or a snack, and occasionally run errands like picking up groceries while Alex slept. It was never framed as an expectation, more like a favour, and it did not happen every single week. I also gently suggested more than once that it might help if Alex filled the tank earlier in a week or woke up a little sooner on Sundays. They agreed in theory and said they would try, so I kept helping when it fit into my plans. This weekend was different. We had heavy snow overnight and through most of the day. I made a point of shopping ahead of time so I could stay in, and I was honestly looking forward to a quiet day at home in comfortable clothes, not braving icy roads. I also really dislike driving in winter conditions, especially in a car that is not mine. When Alex asked again if I could go fill the tank, I told them no. I explained that I did not feel safe driving in the snow and that I had no reason to go out anyway. Alex pushed back, saying the gas station was close and that they were running out of time. I repeated that I was uncomfortable and did not want to risk it. They left for work clearly upset, skipped saying goodbye, and later sent me a message saying they ended up stopping for gas themselves and arrived a few minutes late. The tone made it clear they blamed me for the stress and delay. Now I am sitting here wondering if I crossed the line by saying no this time, especially since I had helped so often before. I see it as a favour that became an expectation, while Alex seems to see it as something I should have continued doing regardless of circumstances. I cannot tell if I was setting a reasonable boundary or being unsupportive when it mattered. Can a gift still be a gift if it comes with strings attached? Last winter, my partner's mother gave our household and our children several restaurant gift cards as holiday presents. They were all for modest amounts, roughly enough to cover part of a casual meal. I thanked her, put the cards with our other gift items, and did not think much more about it. To me, they were simply gifts we could use whenever we wanted, like any other present. A few weeks ago, she messaged both my partner and me and suggested we all go out to eat that same day and use one of the gift cards. I was genuinely confused and asked which card she meant, because I assumed she was talking about something she still had. She clarified that she meant the restaurant cards she had given to us. She also said she did not have them with her because I had taken them home. I responded honestly that I did not realize I was not supposed to, since they were given to us as gifts. That is when she explained that she expected to be included every time we used one of those cards. According to her, the cards were meant for shared outings with her, not for us to use on our own. This caught me off guard, especially because the amounts on the cards would barely cover a single adult meal if we went together. It felt less like a generous present and more like a way to obligate us into plans. For additional context, I have kept some emotional distance from her over the past year due to ongoing tension, and my partner tends to stay quiet and avoid conflict when issues with his mother come up. From my perspective, this makes the situation feel even more uncomfortable. It seems as though the gift cards are being used as leverage to force time together rather than as a no-strings-attached gesture. I am struggling with whether it is unreasonable to want to use these gift cards freely, without conditions attached, or whether I am overreacting to something that should be harmless. Did I do something wrong by keeping a date off I plan a year ahead? I work in an office where time off is awarded strictly by seniority, and everyone submits their main vacation requests at the same time each year, so if you want a specific day you really have to plan far in advance or hope there are leftover slots. Back in early spring last year, I requested the Tuesday after a major winter holiday in the following January because that day is always miserable at work with extra workload and late hours, and I was lucky enough to be the only person who asked for it, so I got it approved almost a full year ahead. Toward the end of the year, a coworker I barely know pulled me aside and quietly told me she was planning a very private wedding and had already secured nearly a full week off, but she really wanted that extra day I had booked and hoped I might cancel, and while I agreed to let her know if my plans changed, I never promised to give it up. She seemed disappointed and later implied she thought I would cancel since weddings are a big deal, but our working relationship stayed distant and polite as it always had been. Not long after, we were assigning mandatory overtime based on seniority, and when it was her turn followed by mine, she asked if I would swap with her because she had personal plans, and I declined simply because I did not want to work late that day either. Since then she has completely stopped speaking to me, and a few other coworkers have been noticeably colder, which makes me wonder if she has been venting about me. The truth is that I am not doing anything special on my scheduled day off and did not have a major reason to avoid overtime beyond not wanting to work, but I planned the time well in advance and followed the rules, so now I am questioning whether holding my boundaries makes me unfair or if I am being made to feel guilty for not accommodating someone else's life events. Did I abandon my parent with a debt I never agreed to? I am a 20-year-old man who has been paying on a car loan tied to my parents since I was 17. For my birthday back then, my mother gave me what she called a gift, a brand new sedan that I assumed was reasonably priced because her then partner, who claimed to be good with money, handled the dealership paperwork. I later learned the car was financed for nearly double its original value, with no money down and a high interest rate because my mother was unemployed and had poor credit at the time. The monthly payment was enormous, but the agreement was that I would split it with her partner. That arrangement lasted only a few months before I was left covering the full payment alone, which I have done ever since. When I was 19, I tried to move the loan fully into my name, but the bank explained that refinancing would increase the total cost significantly, so we both agreed not to do it. I have since moved out, share an apartment, and am struggling more with expenses. After some advice from people around me, I started looking for a more affordable vehicle and found a lightly used compact car that cost far less than what I am still paying off. I told my mother I planned to buy it and that she could decide whether to sell the original car herself, which immediately led to a blow-up. She insisted the car was my responsibility because it was a gift, claimed she did me a favour by keeping the loan in her name, and demanded I empty my savings to continue paying for it. What makes this harder is that she is newly divorced, unemployed, and supporting 2 younger children. I feel torn between believing I should not be financially trapped by a decision I did not make or understand at 17, and feeling guilty for leaving her with a massive debt during a very vulnerable time in her life. I am trying to figure out whether protecting myself financially makes me heartless or whether it is reasonable to finally step away from a burden that never should have been mine to begin with. Did I cross a line by buying a house beside someone from my past? I am a man in my early 30s, and during university I was extremely close with a woman my age. We spent nearly every day together and trusted each other completely, until our friendship ended badly. She took part of my academic work and presented it as her own, which led to me being questioned by faculty and senior staff. This situation was stressful and humiliating, and although it eventually resolved, our friendship never recovered. While we were still close, we talked a lot about where we grew up. She told me she was from a coastal town I will call Harborwick, and I mentioned that I was from a different seaside place, Bayford. Hearing she was from Harborwick stuck with me, because my mother used to vacation there every year, and when I was 19 I scattered her ashes there after she passed away from cancer. That town has always held deep emotional meaning for me. Harborwick is a very popular and expensive area in England, the kind of place where family homes often cost close to £1 million and rarely come up for sale. Out of curiosity, I checked the property site one day and found a house listed for a surprisingly low price. It needed extensive renovation, which explained the cost, but the location was perfect. It was stepped from the sea, close enough for me to run along the beach daily for my mental health, a short walk from where my mother's ashes rest, and with an easy distance of a train station that connects to London, where I commute a couple of days a week for work. I bought the house and did not even step inside for the first month because contractors were handling major repairs. After the new year, I started doing the remaining work myself. A few weeks later, a delivery driver asked if I could take in a package for my neighbour who was not home. When I saw the name on the label, I immediately recognised it because of its unusual spelling. That was when I realised I lived next door to my former friend and her parents. I declined to accept the package. Soon after, she discovered I was her neighbour. She showed up at my door visibly angry, yelling loudly enough that several neighbours came outside to see what was happening. Since then, I have heard through relatives that some people think I am in the wrong for creating tension on the street and that I should consider moving. The truth is, I did not choose this house because of her. I chose it because it is affordable, meaningful, and ideal for my life and well-being. I have moved on from what happened years ago, and I do not believe I should give up a home that means so much to me simply because someone else is uncomfortable living nearby. Should I give up my home for a weekend to protect our roommate's secret? I share a 3-bedroom apartment with 2 other students, and we all pay the same rent, utilities included. I will call myself Daniel, and my roommates Alex and Mira. Alex is barely around because he stays with his girlfriend most of the week, which usually leaves just Mira and me in the apartment. For me, this place is not a social hub, it is simply where I live. I go to lectures, study at the library, come home, and keep to myself. I am polite and friendly, but I value my space, and I pay for it. A few days ago, Mira approached me with what she framed as a request but delivered more like an expectation. Her brothers are visiting next weekend, and her family does not know she lives with men. Because of this, she wants the apartment to appear as if she lives alone. Her solution was for me to leave the apartment for the entire weekend and move all my toiletries and personal items into my bedroom. I explained that I had nowhere to go. I cannot afford a hotel, I do not have friends nearby to stay with, and my girlfriend will be out of town visiting her family. Her response was to shrug and tell me that figuring it out was my responsibility. That response alone made me feel disrespected and angry. I am now stuck feeling like the bad guy for refusing. Alex has already agreed to be gone, which makes me look even worse by comparison, even though he already spends most weekends elsewhere. I understand that Mira's family situation is complicated and culturally sensitive, but I do not think it is fair for me to be asked to give up my home and spend money I do not have while still paying rent. I am not trying to expose her or cause drama, I just do not want to be forced out of my own living space. Am I wrong for refusing to leave and insisting that this is not something I should have to sacrifice for? Is it wrong to refuse food prepared this way? Last night I sat down to cook dinner with my partner. We both work long days and usually enjoy cooking together as a way to unwind. While I was outside tending to marinated fish on the grill, my partner was inside putting together a large bowl of salad meant for both of us. At first everything felt normal and relaxed until I noticed a familiar habit starting up again. As the salad came together, my partner kept tasting it directly from the main bowl, scooping bites with the same spoon and then dropping that spoon back in to stir everything around. This is something I have mentioned before because it genuinely turns my stomach. In my own family, serving dishes were always treated as shared spaces, and once a utensil went into someone's mouth, it did not go back into food meant for everyone. Her family, on the other hand, treats this as completely normal, and I know that because I have seen it happen at their dinner table more than once. I calmly asked her if she could either stop tasting from the main bowl or make herself a small portion to snack on while she worked. I explained that it made me uncomfortable and distracted me from enjoying the meal. She brushed it off, told me I was being uptight, and kept doing exactly what she had been doing. I decided not to push it further in that moment because I did not want to derail the entire evening, so I finished cooking and tried to let it go. When we finally sat down to eat, she reached for the salad and offered to serve me, using the same spoon she had been tasting from all along. I politely said no and told her I would skip the salad. She immediately wanted to know why, and when I tried to deflect by saying I was not feeling like having any, she kept pressing the issue. After several rounds of questions, I finally repeated my original concern and admitted that seeing the same used spoon mixed back into the salad had put me off completely. That is when the mood shifted. She accused me of being dramatic and said she had spent a long time making the meal for me. She framed it as though I was rejecting her effort rather than reacting to something that genuinely bothered me. Before leaving the room, she added that if I thought the salad was bad, I would have been horrified watching her prepare the rice, which I had already eaten without thinking twice. That comment lingered with me and made me feel unsettled for the rest of the night. What frustrates me most is that I was not trying to control how she eats or shame her habits. I was simply asking for a basic boundary around shared food. I did not mind tasting with a clean spoon or grabbing a quick bite set aside separately. What bothered me was the repeated use of a wet utensil being mixed into food we were both expected to eat, and then feeling pressure to ignore my discomfort so her feelings would not be hurt. I am left wondering if I was truly unreasonable for refusing the salad, or if it is fair to expect a little consideration when it comes to shared meals. Was I wrong for quietly leaving a family wedding early? I am a 27-year-old man who attended my older sister's wedding last weekend. We have a decent relationship, but we are not especially close, and I was there simply as a guest, not part of the wedding party. I went in with normal expectations and fully understood that weddings are stressful and imperfect. From early on, though, the day felt uncomfortable. There were several last-minute changes and a lot of tension, which I tried to brush off. What bothered me was that my sister kept snapping at me over small things. At one point, she asked me to change seats because I was apparently in the way of photos, and later she was annoyed that I had moved because she wanted family sitting together. I did my best to follow directions, but it felt like I was doing something wrong no matter what I did. At the reception, I was seated at a table with people I did not know, which was fine, except my place sitting had been forgotten entirely. There was no name card, no meal selection, and no chair set for me. I eventually flagged down a server and was given a plate, but it was clear I was an afterthought. On its own, that would not have mattered much, but combined with everything else, it added to the feeling that I did not really belong there. During the speeches, my sister thanked a long list of people who had supported them, including friends, co-workers, and even neighbours. I was not mentioned at all. I know weddings are not about recognizing every individual guest, but hearing that still hurt more than I expected. By the time dinner ended, I felt drained, awkward, and honestly unwanted. I helped my parents, stayed calm, and left quietly without saying goodbye to my sister. I did not announce it or make a scene. I just removed myself. The next day she texted asking where I had gone and said it was hurtful that I left early without telling her, especially since some people noticed. I told her I was not feeling well and did not want to draw attention. She said I was being passive-aggressive and that I should have pushed through for one night. My mother agreed and said weddings are not about individual feelings. A friend of mine thought it was strange how I was treated and said leaving quietly was reasonable. I genuinely was not trying to make a statement. I just reached a point where I no longer felt welcome and did not see a reason to stay. When constant criticism turns a loving habit into resentment. I am in my early 30s and live with my partner in a mid-sized city far from where I grew up. I work a fairly demanding office job, and over the last few years I also invested time and money into learning how to cook through evening classes and earlier school programs. Cooking started as something I truly enjoyed and a way to show care in our relationship. At the beginning, I would plan meals, grocery shop after work, and spend a good chunk of my evenings cooking for both of us because it made me happy. Gradually, though, it became less about enjoyment and more about expectation. My partner knows how to cook and has even made meals before, but most nights it was simply assumed that I would handle dinner. What made this harder was that almost every meal came with commentary. If I cooked something lighter, it was called boring or lacking flavour. If I made something rich or comforting, I was told it was unhealthy or a bad choice. When I tried new dishes to keep things interesting, they were brushed off as not something my partner would ever ask for. Often, seasoning would be added before a single bite was taken, followed by jokes about how the meal needed fixing, which slowly drained any joy I had left in cooking. The breaking point came recently after a long workday when I spent well over an hour preparing dinner from scratch. I was tired, but still hopeful that maybe this time it would be appreciated. Instead, my partner took one bite, shrugged, and said it was fine but that I should have done it differently. Something in me finally snapped. I calmly but firmly said that I was done cooking for them. I explained that I would still cook for myself, but from now on they would need to make their own meals. I told them that constantly being criticized made me feel unappreciated and taken for granted, and that it was no longer worth the effort. Since then, the atmosphere at home has been tense. My partner is clearly upset and keeps acting as though I overreacted and created a problem out of nothing. Meanwhile, I feel a mix of relief and guilt, and I cannot stop wondering whether setting this boundary was justified or if I somehow handled the situation poorly. Am I wrong for feeling frustrated that my spouse won't allow regular food in our home? I am in my mid-30s and have been my wife for several years. Until recently, food was never a major source of conflict between my spouse and me. Over the past year, however, things have shifted in a way that has left me feeling increasingly boxed in and strangely uncomfortable in my own home. My spouse has become extremely committed to preparing all food from scratch. At first it felt harmless and even impressive. Homemade bread, snacks, and dessert slowly replaced store-bought versions, and I appreciated the effort and skill involved. Over time, though, this approach expanded to nearly everything we eat. Sauces, staples, and even items that most people buy frozen or prepackaged are now made entirely at home. I will be clear that the food tastes good and I recognize how much time and energy goes into it. That part is not in question. What has become difficult is that there is no room left for choice. Sometimes I simply want the familiar, convenient version of certain foods. Not as a rejection of her cooking, but because I enjoy them or find comfort in them. My spouse's position is that because she does most of the cooking and grocery shopping, all food decisions should align with her values. She believes that processed or junk food does not belong in the house at all, and that allowing it would undermine what she is trying to do. Her solution is that if I want those foods, I should eat them elsewhere. That means grabbing fast food on the way home, eating snacks at work, or keeping those preferences entirely out of sight. Over time, this has made me feel oddly secretive and juvenile, like I am hiding something instead of making a reasonable adult choice. I never expected that wanting a bag of chips or a simple store-bought meal would turn into something I have to justify or relocate. Whenever I try to explain how this makes me feel, the conversation turns into how ungrateful I am being and how I am minimizing her effort. That hurts, because I do appreciate what she does. I just do not want every single food decision in our shared home to be dictated by one person's philosophy, especially when it leaves me feeling excluded from my own kitchen. At this point, I am less upset about the food itself and more unsettled by the sense that my preferences do not matter. I am wondering whether I am truly being unreasonable, or if it is fair to expect some balance and autonomy in a home we both share. Is it wrong to enforce one simple rule in your own home? I am in my late 20s and grew up in a household where taking off shoes indoors was the norm. It was simply how my family lived, and as an adult I have kept that same rule in my own place. I do not wear shoes inside, and when people come over I politely ask them to remove theirs as well. I understand that not everyone grew up this way, but it is something that matters to me and helped my home feel clean and comfortable. Recently, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment for several friends. Most people had no issue at all and took their shoes off without comment. One guest, however, immediately pushed back. She said her shoes were an important part of her outfit and that she did not want to remove them. I calmly explained that I really do not allow shoes indoors and that I was asking everyone to follow the same rule. She became irritated and insisted that I was being unreasonable. I apologized but stood my ground, explaining again that this was simply how my home operates. At that point, she got angry, accused me of being controlling, and left the apartment altogether. Since then, I have been wondering if I handled the situation poorly or if I should have just let it go to avoid conflict. I never intended to offend anyone, but I also feel like it is fair to set boundaries in my own living space. Was I wrong for standing my ground on who walks me down the aisle? I grew up in a crowded household in a small coastal town in another country, the middle child of 4 kids. My parents split when I was about 8, and my father vanished from our daily lives not long after. I was left with fragments of memories and a lot of anger that hardened as I got older. My older sister and younger brother barely spoke his name, and my younger sibling treated him like a villain from a story we all agreed to hate. My mother encouraged that anger. She carried it loudly and often, and while she provided food and shelter, her words were sharp and unforgiving. Over time, the constant criticism and the lies she told to protect her version of events wore away any trust I had in her. When I turned 19, my father reached out and asked if I would meet him for tea. I almost said no. Years of resentment do not disappear just because someone asks nicely. Still, curiosity and a quiet hope pushed me to agree. He apologized without excuses and told me he wanted to try again, even if that meant moving slowly. I did not forgive him right away, but I chose to listen. Over time, his actions stayed consistent. He checked in, showed up when he said he would, and supported me through school, job changes, and heartbreaks. When my siblings reached adulthood, he contacted them too. They refused, and I respected that decision because everyone heals differently. As I grew closer to my father, my relationship with my mother continued to fracture. She disapproved of almost every choice I made, especially my partner. She is deeply religious, and my fiancé is not, which in her eyes makes him unacceptable. Family dinners became tense, phone calls turned into lectures, and I found myself bracing for criticism whenever her name appeared on my screen. Now, at 29, I am planning my wedding. It should be joyful, but instead it has become a battlefield. I invited my father and asked him to walk me down the aisle. To me, that moment represents the relationship we rebuilt and the support he has given me when I needed it most. When my family found out, everything exploded. My siblings accused me of betraying our childhood pain. My mother demanded that he be removed entirely and insisted that she should take his place instead. They gave me an ultimatum. If my father attends, they will not. They said I was being cruel, selfish, and disrespectful to the past. I listened, I argued back, and eventually I reached my limit. I told them that my wedding is not a stage for old grudges and that I will not erase someone who has been there for me just to keep the peace. If they choose not to come, that is their decision. Now I am left with the weight of that choice. I feel calm about honoring my own boundaries, but the silence from my family is heavy. I cannot help wondering if standing firm makes me heartless or if choosing my happiness is something I was always allowed to do. Am I wrong for protecting my savings after my sibling promised it away? I am a woman in my early 20s who still lives at home while trying to build enough savings to eventually move out. I work a modest job and have been putting money aside for several years, which has meant saying no to trips, shopping, and a lot of small comforts. Everyone in my family knows I am careful with money and that this savings is something I have worked hard for over time. My older sibling, who is in her early 30s, has been struggling financially for a while. She left her full-time job last year and since then has been relying on short-term gigs that never seem to last. A few days ago, she came to me saying she needed help covering some expenses. I told her honestly that I did not have extra money to give away because everything I had saved was meant for moving out and becoming independent. That is when she told me she had already informed our parents that I would help her. I was completely caught off guard by this. When I repeated that I could not do it, she became upset and said I was the only one in the family with any savings and that I could always build it back later. Her tone made it feel like my effort and sacrifices did not matter at all. Since then, my parents have been making comments almost daily. They are not directly demanding anything, but they keep reminding me that I am young, that my sibling is under a lot of stress, and that family should support one another when times are hard. The atmosphere at home has become tense and uncomfortable, and my sibling has barely spoken to me since. I feel torn. On one hand, I know she is struggling and I do not like seeing her stressed or worried. On the other hand, it feels wrong that she assumes she could volunteer my savings without asking, especially knowing how long it took me to build them. I cannot shake the feeling that my boundaries were ignored and that my money was treated like a shared resource instead of something I earned and protected. I keep wondering whether standing my ground makes me selfish or if it is reasonable to say no when something this important to my future is at stake. Is it unreasonable to withdraw support when wedding rules are ignored? My spouse and I have always been very clear with our children about one thing. If we were going to pay for their weddings, there were a few basic expectations attached. These expectations were shared with all of them years ago, long before any engagements. The guidelines were simple in our minds. All family members were to be invited unless there had been a serious falling out. The wedding could not require guests to travel far or leave the country. Immediate family members were always allowed a guest, even if they were single. None of our children objected to these terms at the time, and our two older children followed them without issue, which is why we paid for their weddings in full. Our youngest daughter, who is in her early 30s, is now planning her wedding to her partner. They recently secured a venue and started working through their guest list. During one of our conversations, my daughter casually mentioned that they were planning a child-free wedding. I immediately told her that this directly conflicted with what we had always said. In our family, children are part of the family, excluding them meant not inviting everyone. We sat down to talk it through. She explained that she wanted a very refined, formal event and felt that children would disrupt the atmosphere. Her partner also shared that she has complicated feelings about kids due to how she was raised and does not enjoy being around them. I listened and told them I understood their perspective, but I also reminded them that I had been upfront about the conditions tied to my financial support. I told them I would take some time to think about it. After giving it real consideration, I told them my answer was no. I made it clear they were absolutely free to have the wedding they wanted, including making it child-free, but that I would not be paying for it under those circumstances. That decision did not go over well. Both of them were extremely upset, and my daughter accused me of punishing her and treating her unfairly compared to her siblings. I explained that her siblings received financial support because they followed the same expectations. Nothing about this was news sprung on her at the last minute. Now emotions are high across the board, extended family members are weighing in, and everyone seems angry at once. I am left wondering whether standing by boundaries that were clearly communicated years ago makes me unreasonable, or whether it is fair to step back when those terms are no longer being respected. Was I wrong for leaving when I was pushed into a role I never accepted? I'm a woman in my early 20s who has never enjoyed being around children, and that has always been something I have been open about with the people close to me. I don't find childcare fulfilling, I don't feel comfortable being responsible for young kids, and it's simply not something I want as part of my life right now. That said, someone in my family, an older relative in her 30s, has a young child, and while I care about that child and want her to be safe and happy, my affection has never meant I wanted to act as a substitute caregiver. Several months ago, that relative began asking me for small favours. At first, it was framed as occasional help staying with the child briefly while she ran errands or covering short gaps in her schedule. I didn't enjoy it, but I agreed a few times because I felt put on the spot and didn't want to cause tension. Over time, those small favours quietly turned into an expectation. I was suddenly watching the child for long stretches, multiple times a week, handling meals, bath time, bedtime routines, and constant supervision. What bothered me most was that no one asked anymore. It was assumed I would comply, and if I hesitated or said no, I was met with anger or accusations. Every attempt I made to set boundaries was brushed aside. I was told I was young, that my time wasn't as important, that living under the same roof meant I owed this help. Guilt was used constantly, with reminders about family and how I should be grateful or supportive. When I expressed how drained and unhappy I felt, I was labelled selfish, and after hearing that enough times, I started to believe it. I felt stuck in a role I never agreed to and exhausted by the pressure, but I kept going because it seemed easier than fighting everyone. Eventually, I planned a short getaway with friends, something modest but meaningful to me, and it was arranged and paid for well in advance. For the first time in months, I felt like I had something to look forward to that was just mine. When I shared this plan, instead of support, I was met with immediate hostility. My relative demanded to know what she was supposed to do about her child, as if my plans were irrelevant. I reminded her calmly that I had never committed to being her primary support, and that I had my own life. That's when everything exploded. I was accused of abandoning her, of being irresponsible, and of choosing myself over obligations that were never mine to begin with. I was told to cancel my plans and stay behind, as though my time and autonomy didn't matter. When I refused, The argument escalated into insults and name-calling, and other family members quickly took her side, insisting I needed to step up and stop being difficult. At that point, I felt completely overwhelmed and emotionally worn down. I knew if I stayed, I would either break down or say something I couldn't take back. So I packed a small bag and went to stay with my partner for a few days, simply to get space and breathe. That decision only made things worse. I was accused of running away, of prioritizing our romantic relationship and friendships over my own family, and of proving that I couldn't be depended on. Now I'm left carrying a heavy sense of guilt, especially toward the child, even though I know logically that she isn't my responsibility. I keep questioning whether leaving was wrong, whether standing up for myself crossed a line, and whether protecting my own well-being really makes me the bad person in this situation.